We are joined today with Sean Stapero. He's a fire inspector with the Regina Fire Department, and he is going to share his career path with us today. So I will meet.
All right. So there I am. 32 years ago. No, this is a picture of my 6-year-old who I think is a splitting image, very handsome young man. And he decided to dress up as a fire inspector for Halloween. So I thought that would be a great little lead into discussing what it's like to be a fire inspector. So thanks, Troy, for reaching out and giving us an opportunity to kind of go over the career of a fire inspector. So that's the title, fire inspector, fire investigator with Regina Fire and Protective Services. In order to kind of go down this road, I think there's a lot of paths that you can take. However, they most notably go through the profession of firefighting. So our fire inspectors are all trained as firefighters, and as you gain experience as a firefighter, you then transport yourself into different courses and that kind of thing in your career that will allow you to become a more specialized fire inspector and fire investigator, which is a separate entity, but still works in the team of Regina Fire and Protective Services. So you'll find in this talk that we talk a lot to NFPA, which is National Fire Protection Association. It's an organization that is worldwide, very well known, and they create the standards that you will try to meet when you're in your education for firefighting or fire inspector. And just as a side too, I am in a fire hall, so you're probably going to hear radio this whole time. There's nothing I can do about it. It's just the way it is. So my apologies for that. But the firefighting requirements, NFPA 1001, that is for firefighters. And our firefighters are also required to have their primary care paramedic. And then the 5 years of firefighter experience is, it's not a requirement. It's a nice to have for when you apply to become a fire inspector. Fire inspectors are required to have NFPA 1031, which is the certification for fire inspectors. And you have 2 different levels there, 2 different courses that get you up to a level 2. And then a fire investigator, which is the other side of the job, is NFPA 1033. And then another must-have is for public education, which is NFPA 1035. These are all courses that are taken through a variety of places. Brandon Fire College, the Justice Institute of British Columbia, which is several campuses in British Columbia. You can also challenge these through the province of Saskatchewan. They have a certification body. So volunteer fire departments will be able to train you and then down the road have you certified through the province. And then just to touch on some other valuable courses, NFPA 1021, level 1 to 4, that's fire officer. So once you get higher up into the ranks of firefighting, as well as fire investigating, these are all courses that you can take that's more of a management level. NFPA 1041, level 1 and 2, that's fire service instructor. So if you ever want to teach any of these things that we're talking about, those are some courses that you have to take. NFPA 472 has several levels to it, awareness, operations, and technician. That's for firefighting when it comes to hazardous materials. And then NFPA 1002 is just another one that speaks to driving. When you get a lot of years in with Regina Fire, you have to, it ends up being quite a few years before they actually let you drive a truck. And then that's a whole different certification. The duties, I think this is a video too, if you can press play, Troy. I don't know if you're allowed to do it on your end. So this is just a typical day in Saskatchewan, -40, house fire. Those are real tough ones. That's just me on the street watching our guys try to fight this fire in super cold conditions, and we basically just had to let it burn. So there are those scenarios, but we investigate all fires within the city of Regina. That includes all residential house fires, apartments, vehicle fires, commercial fires. So any businesses that have a fire, we have a mandate and an act that actually requires the investigation of these fires. And most notably, we do that in conjunction with Regina Police, depending on what we come to on a conclusion, whether it's, if we think it's suspicious, then the police are involved as well. But the large part of our job is inspecting commercial properties for life safety. So if you own a business, or if you're a business owner, or any of the places that you go in the city, they're all required by law to follow requirements in the National Fire Code. And all that is a maintenance document. So once a building is constructed under code, which is the National Building Code, the building department says, okay, this building is now safe for people to be in. Now that building transfers to the National Fire Code, and it's up to us as a fire inspector to ensure that they're continuing to maintain fire safety in those buildings. Fire alarm systems, sprinkler systems, emergency generators, emergency lights, all of these items are things that we inspect for and ensure that businesses are maintaining. We deal with a range of complaints, as we have a Regina Fire bylaw, which is a municipal bylaw here in just the city of Regina, specific to our jurisdiction. And that deals with occupant loads. So if you ever hear or see the movies where the big bad fire inspector comes in and they make sure that you're not overcrowding, we just had a very relevant news story happen over the weekend that kind of pertains to this, with the 8 people that died down in the States in that concert. That's something that we govern. We govern how many people are allowed in bars, and that's through the Regina Fire bylaw. We also range to fire pits. If you're going to have a fire pit in the city, you have to meet a whole list of requirements, and we deal with that through complaints. So if you're a neighbor and you don't like your neighbor's fire pit, that comes to us, and we end up going and dealing with that kind of thing. We also educate on fire safety and compliance to the National Fire Code. We actually have 2 public education officers who do that. That's their primary goal, is just to educate public on fire safety. And so they're really involved with schools and with high-risk groups in our city, with the mandate to try to prevent fires. And then the compliance piece of the National Fire Code. While it is a compliance piece, it's an educational piece as well. So lots of building owners don't understand that they have requirements that they need to meet. And so it becomes an education point for us. Another thing with the Regina Fire bylaw is we govern fireworks and pyrotechnics. And we also do plan review in conjunction with the city of Regina, which architects, they want to build this building and they send in drawings, and engineers are involved. It goes to our building department, who review for building code requirement. And then we also, on the backside, help them review these plans for fire safety when it comes to sprinkler requirements, fire alarm and exiting, and that kind of thing. So equipment and spaces. We're kind of a mobile unit. You'll see here, I'm in an office in the fire hall. This is my office that I work out of 3 Station, which is South Regina. This is where my day-to-day takes place, computer input, inspections, updates, that kind of thing. But we're mostly out in the community, in buildings with fire investigating. It takes a lot of equipment, a lot of safety requirements to protect us when we're in a building. And so you'll see on the right-hand side, or I guess my right-hand side, is our fire investigation unit. Everything we need to do a fire investigation is in that truck. And that, it really depends on the type of fire that we have, but the most simplest is we put on a whole bunch of gear, SCBA, which is self-contained breathing apparatus. You'll see us on breathing air to protect our lungs, and a shovel, really. We do a lot of shoveling. Most people don't understand that with a fire investigation, but what a fire investigation is trying to reconstruct the scene to what it looked like prior to the fire. When a fire happens and you put thousands of gallons of water on it, it destroys structure. drywall falls, insulation falls. It's a real mess. So we spend a lot of time digging that stuff away from what we want to look at as we reconstruct scenes. It takes a lot of digging. We also have tools in there to sniff for hydrocarbons, which is more of a criminal aspect of it. Whereas somebody pouring gasoline here, we have devices that will allow us to detect for that, where we then take a sample. And that's kind of the picture on the other side of this slide. It shows us taking evidence. So if you're, whatever your up-to-date favorite crime show is today, I was going to say CSI. I don't even know if that's a thing anymore, but we use that type of equipment when we take evidence, because all of this could potentially be in a court of law if someone gets charged for starting a fire. That doesn't always happen. A lot of our fire investigations are not criminal; they are potentially accidental. So the other backside of that is we want to investigate, find out if that's the case. Why did it get started? And then is it something that we can let industry know about? So if it was electrical and there's a piece of equipment that wasn't working properly, we need to ensure that that company understands it and we report it to the proper agencies who then do recalls and that kind of thing. And a larger portion is education. Was it a cigarette that was improperly put out? And then we try to educate the public on how to do that properly. So equipment and spaces, it's basically the buildings in the city of Regina, this office I'm sitting in, and that truck right there. And we use quite a bit of equipment when it comes to fire investigating. The unknown duties. I started this job and had no idea that any of this stuff existed. So even coming into this, there was a lot of unknowns. These are the codes that I've been kind of discussing. The main one there, you'll see right in the middle, the red one, the National Fire Code. That's what we implement, but it also leads back to the National Building Code. They're companion documents, so we use them both quite regularly. Those documents are created through committees, and they're Canada-wide. So not only is it these books, but it's the standards that I've also been referencing that there's hundreds of standards, NFPA standards that apply to code requirement. And each one of those different standards has a committee that creates them, that updates them, puts new information in them. And so as a fire inspector, that's something that we need to be involved in. So we sit on committees with different NFPA standards. We also do a lot of conflict resolution, which is something that it's not my favorite, but maybe it's tough to understand, but sometimes business owners don't like that we're asking them to do certain things because of whatever reason. Most likely it's money. And then it becomes very heated in different scenarios. We're also tasked with dealing with difficult people in the fire investigation world. So a lot of conflict resolution, maintaining composure, getting through it without terrible scenes. That's something that was definitely an unknown duty. We spent a fair amount of time in court as expert witnesses, and fire investigating is a very specialized thing. Not a lot of people understand it, and so you get brought into court proceedings to explain how did you come to these determinations. You have to go through an expert witness. It's almost like a trial within a trial. And it's very stressful for me anyway. But we also do bylaw court. So if you were a business owner that didn't comply to a certain thing, the city of Regina will take you to court, and then we have to go in and tell them why we asked them to do this and explain that portion. That's kind of the prosecution side of things. We write a lot of fines, and which are ticketing under the Regina Fire Bylaw. That's not so bad. The fines in the city of Regina aren't that bad, but when we give them, it eventually leads to conflict resolution. Not a lot of people like getting tickets, and we don't like giving them. However, it is part of the job, and sometimes you just have to go there. And something else that we deal with a lot, quite a bit actually, is insurance. Every time there's a fire, hopefully you have insurance, and then the insurance company gets involved, and there's a whole other industry that we'll kind of speak to in a bit here that on the fire side is involved through insurance and one of those other unknown duties. This is also a video, Troy, if you want to play the larger one. So just an example of some of the stuff that we govern. This is at Mosaic Stadium, the Winter Classic. I think it was 2018. I can't remember the year. It was Calgary and Winnipeg. This was a big project for us. We have to deal with fire safety of that stadium when it is full. And it presents a very big challenge when we're doing different events like this. You see the pyrotechnics that were used on the field there. We govern that in the city. So one of the rewarding aspects is getting to go to these cool events. We were on that field for most of this. We were at that game to ensure safety. So pretty neat. Probably pretty small on your screen, but just a picture of our team. Very rewarding to work with these professionals. They are exactly that, professionals, very knowledgeable. The fire marshal in Regina, I think, is in his 43rd year in the fire industry. Wealth of knowledge. He's seen it all. That is definitely a rewarding aspect of the job, is working with these people. And variety. This job is not the same day to day. There is always something different going on. You never have the same thing. And just when you get sick of doing something, there's something drastically different that you have to do. So I would say those are the three most rewarding aspects. Challenges and stressors, I kind of touched on it a bit already. It becomes very stressful when you're put into a scenario where fire safety is at risk and you're now the person that's shutting down events that people depend on and have wanted to be a part of due to fire safety concerns. It also becomes very challenging to deliver that news. These pictures, I'll just explain a little bit. I don't know how big you can see them, but the one on the left, it's an exit. The exit sign is not illuminated. There's a sign on the door that says "Do not use." It was locked, and there's a curtain over top of it that we had to kind of take away. The doors in the middle are exit doors. They're chained, locked. And then the one on the right is a pull station, which activates a fire alarm system if you ever had to, which they so nicely taped. All of these deficiencies happened in about a 5-minute time span in one of the biggest events that we have in the city that sees 100,000 people walk through this building. And so those types of situations become very stressful, not only for us as a fire inspector, but for owners who have to comply. Kind of touched on the court thing. That's always very challenging. When we get into the inspection side of things, so I'm going into a business and now I'm asking them to do A, B, and C because the fire code requires it. They also have the right of appeal. That means they think that we're asking them to do something that's not a requirement, and so they can appeal that to our provincial body, which is the Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency. That's basically like them saying we don't know how to do our job and we don't think they're doing it properly. So it's almost as if they can appeal what we do on a day-to-day, which then puts scrutiny on that, and that becomes stressful as well. And then anytime you have to lay a ticket to somebody, it's not only challenging, it is very stressful at times. We'll run into salary and benefits. This is kind of a rough estimate. And the only reason I say that is because I think there's a lot of ways that you can navigate to this spot. The most common way in the Regina Fire Department is you become a firefighter, you put in your time as a firefighter, and then if you're interested in spots open up in this prevention division, you then apply and can kind of move through the ranks that way. That's not the only way to do it. There are some departments in Canada, every department does it differently. Some departments look for people who have a technical background if they're going to be in the prevention division. They don't necessarily require firefighting experience. So you'll see technical programs that are offered out in Ontario, Seneca College being one of them. They will provide a program that basically educates you on how to be a inspector of sorts, not necessarily fire inspector, but just in the fire safety side of code requirement. So we do have one employee that never worked a day in his life on the lines. He's trained as a firefighter. He just never got a job as a firefighter. Had this program and then got hired on to our division about 10 years ago. So I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but it's kind of, I'm coming at it as if you have to become a firefighter first. So, you know, our salary range, this is actually probably on the high scale. Firefighters, I don't think when they first start, they don't quite make that much. So it's actually even lower. So it's a larger scale, but probably closer to, you know, 65,000 to, you know, you can, if you want to be the fire chief someday, you're going to be over 130. So there's a big wage gap there. Very good paying job though. We get dental, paramedical, vision. Dental's an 80% coverage, which is quite good. Paramedical is pretty decent. Vision, it's okay, as you can see. I can speak to that. Pension, the defined benefit, you're not going to find that a lot out there, I don't think, nowadays. 70% income combined with CPP and old age security. We pay a massive amount into this pension though, which is something you should understand going in. You see this big number here on salary, and it's a good salary, don't get me wrong. A large portion of paychecks go to pay into this pension. Is it a good pension? It's a wonderful pension. Do you pay a lot into it? It's a huge amount. As far as vacation goes, you start with 3 weeks, which is different as a firefighter. If you're getting in as the firefighter, they work shift work, and so you don't really necessarily get these vacation times. And but once you get into a prevention division, you become a Monday to Friday type employee. You get 3 weeks of vacation, but it all depends on seniority. So when you start with the fire department, your seniority starts there. So let's say you get on as a firefighter, you put in 5 years, and then you get on with the prevention division, another 3 years, and now you've already got an extra week of vacation. So that's kind of how it works. Every 8 years, you get another week of vacation, up to, I believe, 6 weeks. Someday I hope to get there. And we're an 8 to 5-er, except for when we're on call. There's 7 fire inspectors in the city. We take a week at a time being on call, which means any fire that's happening any time of the day, you get called to it. So it's pretty decent that way. That only happens every 7 weeks that we're on. As far as supports and professional development, we are part of several organizations. You'll see on the bottom there, the Canadian Association of Fire Investigators, the National Association of Fire Investigators. Those associations require you to have 40 hours of training in your discipline, which is fire investigating, over a 5-year period to keep your certifications. So in order to be part of these organizations, you have to write exams, and then they give you certifications. Those were the fancy letters you may have seen at the start. The CFEI, the CCFI-C. That's from these organizations. Certified Fire and Explosion Investigator is what that stands for. But you have to prove that you had 40 hours of training. So we go to conferences, different seminars, online training, all supported by the department, paid for by the department. City of Regina, because we fall under the umbrella of the City of Regina, we are fully funded by taxpayer dollars. And the City of Regina, on top of all this, allows every employee ongoing education up to $1,200 a year for a return of service agreement. So if I have a couple courses I want to take, as long as it's applicable to my job, I can go through and take those, but then they come back and say, okay, well, your course costs this much money, $600 or whatever, so now you owe us 6 months of time. Very excellent IT support. We have a huge IT department, City of Regina. We're also unionized. Local 181 represents International Association of Firefighters. They do great work for us. One thing to note is you do pay into a union. So that's another thing that comes off your paycheck every 2 weeks. And also part of the Saskatchewan Association of Fire Chiefs, the Inspectors Division. That's a special division on the side of the Saskatchewan Association of Fire Chiefs that is just for people that are enforcing code through the fire code. Opportunities. So again, I'm going to kind of talk about this whole thing as it comes to like a firefighter, fire inspector, it's something you're kind of working into. Not a lot of positions in the prevention division. We do, you know, guys retire, there are positions that come up. So I won't say that it's not, there are from time to time positions, but you're more likely to, you know, come in as a firefighter. There are lots, like we're kind of getting into that era, and then we have been for several years, where we're seeing a lot of retirements. And so that opens up firefighter positions on the, excuse me, on the bottom end. We just hired another 8 firefighters, but I will say it is very difficult to get on as a firefighter as well. You need the training, you need the PCP, the paramedic, and then you need to go through a very rigorous hiring process. And then to get into the prevention side, you know, all this other ongoing education has to happen. But like I said, there are other avenues. Advancement in our division, I'll just speak to, you know, fire prevention. There's not a huge amount of advancement. Even from when I started this job, you know, a decade ago, we used to have a couple different places that you could go to, but since then there's less managers. So you could become the fire marshal, you could apply down the road for a deputy chief, if you're really ambitious, a chief down the road, but these positions all come with higher degree programs that we haven't really discussed here. There's only, out of these spots, there's only 2 deputy chiefs, there's only 1 fire marshal, and there's only 1 chief position. So those are difficult to get into. Safe to say, you know, I would be happy doing this position for a career. So take that for what it is. There are a ton of related fields though. Public education, we have a couple public education officers. This is something that this all kind of leads into. The safety industry, huge safety industry. If you have this type of background, you'd be able to get in with, you know, private companies. There's a lot of companies that we use their safety equipment, Dragger, MSA. There's all of these different companies that need these professionals to work with. Provincial positions. So you heard me maybe mention the Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency. We have a governing body, that's them. So that's provincial. They also have people that do this job provincially. They're supposed to overlook us. And so there's positions that do just this, but on a provincial level. The building industry is a big one. You know, this type of training would bode well for that. You know, building inspectors, it's not a far stretch to say you couldn't also reach out into building, you know, becoming a building inspector. When I mention insurance companies, insurance is like a whole nother entity that has huge opportunity. There is tons, and even in the last 5 years, this has just exploded. Whenever there's a fire, we have jurisdiction to do that fire investigation as the local fire inspector. The insurance company also has jurisdiction on the insured buildings to hire their own fire investigator because they are more interested in litigation, which is a whole different thing. But anyway, all of this to say, private fire investigators, there's all sorts of companies out there looking for private fire investigators right now. And like I said, insurance industry. So this all related fields in that aspect. Great work-life balance. Love the job for this. I have young kids. 8 to 5 job. That's beautiful. Love the shift. It's a Monday to Friday. Again, though, you know, if you're coming through as a firefighter, they do shift work, and every fire department's a bit different. But our guys here do 2 days, 2 nights. They get 2 days off, and then they come back for 2 days, and then they get 6 days off. So they work 10 and 12-hour shifts. That's a beautiful shift too. I've never heard anyone really complain about that, although they do. They don't get a lot of choice as to, you know, when they're working, they have to be working. So you don't get a lot of Christmases off. You don't get a lot of holidays and that kind of thing. For us, however, in the prevention division, like I said, 3 weeks every 8 years, add a week. We get earned days off every 3rd Friday, or as they're mentioned, EDOs, all holidays, federal, provincial. Just added another one to the list, Truth and Reconciliation Day. And we get double time when we're called out for overtime. So that happens quite regularly. Just with fires happening in the city, we get called out to it. Great work-life balance, though. Here we are, questions. And you know what? I thought I was going to be running the PowerPoint, so I had a really funny picture that I added in there, but then Troy said he was going to run the PowerPoint, so no worries. It was like my little jab at the Regina police, though, because I have a good picture of a police officer with my helmet on and an SCBA on, but with his handgun. They're always trying to be like us. We had a really bad fire, and the owner had about 60 rifles in the house that they wanted to get out. So the police had to go in there, and the only way they could do it safely was to use our gear. So I had to make sure to get a picture of that, just to give them the little Regina Fire Police jab, you know.
So Shantz, when you did your extended education to become or to get the position that you're in now, do you do that after hours on the side, or is that time that's applied at work? How did you go about getting those extra classes and education to access an inspector role?
Yeah, I guess I didn't really get into that, did I? So kind of speaking to how there's all sorts of different pathways, I was a radio guy. Living in Swift Current, I had been educated in media, and Swift Current just happens to have a composite fire department. And what that means is they have full-time firefighters, but they also have auxiliary firefighters, which is a fancy word for volunteer. So early on, I applied for a volunteer position, and depending on which department you're on, in Swift Current, they were very proactive in training. So we trained, I got all my firefighting training through that department, and then challenge testing through the province, which is the SPSA. They have certifications that come and test you. Swift Current paid for the training. The testing just came from the province. So every Wednesday and weekends, that was just Swift Current's schedule. We would train so we could prepare for these tests. So I went through all of this training, made some good contacts in the industry. One of our deputy chiefs there who hired me had moved on and found himself in Regina as the fire marshal. So I was 6 years in, I think, as a volunteer firefighter, looking to become a full-time firefighter. My old boss, who is now fire marshal, reached out to me and said, "Hey, I think you'd be great for this position. You need to get some education though, and I have lots of retirements coming up in the next little while, so you should try to get some of this education," which is all the fire prevention stuff that we talked about to become a fire inspector, all of these different certifications. So I spent the next year and a half kind of flying all over the country taking these courses. It was all on my own time. I was still doing a full-time job. Some of them were online. I had to fly out to BC for a few courses. I had to do, drive out to Brandon for a few courses, which take, a week or a month or something like that. and then ended up applying for the position in Regina and got the position. So my firefighter experience, we keep talking about this 5 years of firefighter experience, came from a volunteer department. So it wasn't necessarily from the Regina Fire Department.
Interesting.
Did that answer your question, Gord? I kind of rambled a bit there.
Yes, that does. It just wanted to make the point that a lot of times when you get that further education, it comes at your own expense and on your own time. And kids should be aware of that, a lot of times if you want to advance in a career, it requires some extra effort on your part and sometimes some extra expense.
For sure. I'm trying to think of any other questions. You were so thorough that it's pretty comprehensive. You got any questions, Gord?
So the inspector, you're going out to the buildings, but the investigator, they're really kind of 2 separate roles, or do you do both of those? Do they cross over?
We do both. They cross over, mainly because the fire safety aspect. When we have a fire in a commercial building, there's a ton of requirements for that building now to be brought back up to, to be safe for public. And then there's also an education piece in there. So they do tie together. Larger departments, you'll find, split those two. So you'll have even, let's go to our neighbors in Alberta, Edmonton and Calgary. They have a prevention division. Those are just fire inspectors. That's all they do is code compliance. They also have a investigation division, and those guys are that's all they do is fire investigation. So they're actually on shift, and they just roll out with the trucks. So every jurisdiction's a bit different. Here in Regina, just because we are a smaller community, we do both, which is, it's a lot. It is a lot.
Thank you.
And to expand on that, if you're looking for more on that, there's 7 of us in the city, enough fire inspectors for each fire hall. We have 7 fire halls. Those are split out into districts. We each have our own district of the city. And so we take care of certain things in that district. But then on top of that, we also have portfolios. So we all have a specialty that we take care of through the whole city. So for me, I take care of assembly occupancies. I'm the guy behind the Mosaic Stadium events, anything happening at Evraz, concerts, all that stuff that's something that I do as well as these other things. We have a guy that takes care of hospitals. We have a guy that takes care of schools. We have a guy that takes care of commercial kitchens. So we kind of break it down like that as well.
Nice. So how many years to retirement? I know you talked about the pension, but how many years to qualify for that?
Well, our pension was in really rough shape, probably about 6 years ago. And so they made a few changes to it just so we could continue with the defined benefit. It was a big fight to keep that defined benefit. And so one of the changes they made, it was no longer a rule of 80, it was a rule of 85. So I fell into that rule of 85. Well, everybody falls into that rule 85 if they didn't retire within a certain time span, which has since come and gone. So I think I can go at 56 if I wanted, 57. So early retirement is another, 18 years away for me. That would be early, but who knows? That's a long way away.
Oh, but those are important things when kids are considering going in. Same as the teaching profession, that's 85 as well, or 30 years.
Yeah. I'm probably going to be a 60 guy. I'll probably be 60. The early retirement it's quite a hit. It's nice if you could do it, but it's quite a difference.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop my recording here.